Welcome to Lesson 6, Adolescence. As the name suggests, this lesson is going to focus on what ADHD looks like in the adolescent. Now, it wasn't that long ago that clinicians and researchers believed that ADHD all but disappeared by the time the child entered puberty. Although there was never a real clear explanation for this belief, there was sort of the assumption that the introduction of hormones triggered by puberty resulted in the resolution of many issues we associate with ADHD. Today, we know a little bit more about the stages of development and what happens to ADHD as we reach puberty and as we change over time. The fact is, we do see a major shift in symptom presentation when children mature. However, it's not that the symptoms disappear, rather the symptoms change and begin to manifest in a different way. So let's talk about some of these common changes. And the way that I'll break this down is by the three primary categories of symptoms: the inattention, the hyperactivity, and the impulsivity. So let's start with inattention. In the school-age child, as we talked about in the last lesson, inattention was characterized by the child's inability to concentrate and sustain attention, especially with tasks that require mental effort, such as homework and concentrations on tests and things like that. In fact, one of the major arguments parents of school-age children with ADHD make is that their child can sit for hours watching TV or playing video games, yet they can't sit for 15 minutes to do their math homework. We're going to talk more about that in Unit 4, but for now, let's talk about what happens as they transition into adolescence. The reality is, their inattention symptoms remain. They continue to have a hard time focusing for sustained periods of time. There are, though, two differences. First, as children reach adolescence, meaning middle and especially in high school, they now have the opportunity to take classes that they choose. Let's think about that for a moment. Unlike elementary school, where every student is required to take exactly the same classes, do exactly the same thing, follow exactly the same schedule every day, once they reach middle school, students can choose electives that stimulate them, which is really, as we've talked about before, what they really need to sustain attention. So if they're inattentive and struggle with sustained concentration in one class, their next period may be a class that really gets them going, a class that they really enjoy. And because it's a preferred class, they're able to sort of recollect themselves and focus and pay attention. So instead of taking an accounting class or something that they may find less stimulating, they may be in a PE class, or they may be in an electronics or robotics class or something like that, that really gets them energized and gets them engaged. So it's not that the inattention is gone, it's that they're engaged in class work that is much more stimulating to them. The second difference in adolescence is that they exercise a great deal of independence. They spend more time alone, or with their peers more specifically, as opposed to time with their parents. What this means is that parents see less inattentive symptoms. Now in school, the same kinds of things happen. Teachers offer students more independence. So while there are pros and cons to this, teachers begin to place more academic responsibility on the student by the time they're reaching middle and especially again high school. Therefore, it is much less apparent when the student is struggling, and the teacher just doesn't see it as often. They may see the student as less engaged, they may see the student as not paying attention, but it's oftentimes interpreted in different ways. It's not that the inattention goes away, it's just less noticed, and it's oftentimes attributed to other things. Disinterest, for example, is a very common thing that teachers attribute inattentive behaviors to. So, overall, when it comes to the inattention behaviors, it's not that they go away, it's that they just change. We have different opportunities for inattentive behaviors, and quite simply, the inattentive behaviors are just less noticed by both parents and teachers by the time students reach adolescence. Now, on to the next group of symptoms, hyperactivity. Like the symptoms of inattention, hyperactivity symptoms don't go away, but they do become less obvious. As children with ADHD reach adolescence, they tend to find themselves more engaged in extracurricular activities. As a result, they remain much more active. though their activity is more goal-directed. They're not outside playing necessarily, but they're always on the go. They're going to meet their friends here, going to meet their friends there. This seems to be because they choose activities based upon their interest. When they're children, when kids are younger, we tend to impose upon them many of the activities that they do. So if a child doesn't want to go to the store, well, if he's only 7 years old, he really doesn't have a choice. If he's 15 years old, you're able to leave him at home alone, or you're able to allow him to do something else on his own while you're doing the things that you need to do. So as kids are able to make more of their own decisions, their activity is expressed in different ways. So instead of being at home all the time or always under your feet, they're now able to go and do what they want to do, which allows them to expend some of that hyperactive symptoms without you necessarily noticing it as much. Another shift in middle school is the introduction of electives. And again, just like with the inattentive behaviors where the electives help the child become more focused because it's something of interest, it also for kids with hyperactivity allows more physical education courses. I have patients, for example, who are enrolled in 2 or 3 PE courses in the same semester, all at the same time. So second, fourth, and sixth period of the day may all be physical education classes. Again, allowing him opportunity to get some of that energy out. This obviously introduces opportunities to get rid of some of that hyperkinetic and hyperactive energy. Moreover, when kids are in middle and high school, they change class periods. Now, certainly the time frame in between class periods is relatively short, just a few minutes usually. However, we know that those brief brain breaks, for lack of a better word, are really beneficial to kids with ADHD, especially kids who are somewhat hyperactive. So just those few minutes of being able to walk between classes, talk a little bit with their friends, and get that movement out of them really does re-energize them and recommit them to being able to maintain their behavior for the next period. Finally, when talking about adolescents with their hyperactivity, we have to notice that they constantly describe inner restlessness. So when I talk with kids with or adolescents with ADHD, what they talk about is sort of this internal drive to move. While they may remain seated and have that sort of control, what we find out from them in talking with them is that there is an urge inside them to get up and get moving. They report that they feel this urge. Sometimes that creates some inattentive behaviors because they're focusing on, no, I gotta stay sitting down, I gotta remain seated, I can't get up, I'm gonna get in trouble if I get up, and then all of a sudden they've missed the last 5 minutes of instruction from the teacher. So this inner restlessness, this inner hyperactivity causes some inattention symptoms, but it's also a more developed manifestation of the same hyperactivity that we saw when they were younger. So again, like with the inattention, hyperactivity doesn't go away, it just changes shape. Now the third group of symptoms is impulsivity. As we talked about earlier, impulsivity is a hallmark feature of ADHD, especially ADHD combined type. It's very easily recognizable in children because they're intruding on others, they are answering questions before the question has even been asked, they're doing things without thinking about the consequences. So we can see it pretty clearly in children, and especially school-age children with ADHD. In adolescence, however, while the impulsivity continues, it does change shape once again. This time, when we talk about impulsivity, we're looking at different and sometimes more complex behaviors. So what we see, for example, is impulsivity manifests in relationships. So we see adolescents making decisions in relationships that are much more impulsive and things that perhaps are much more mature than they would at other stages. So children or adolescents with ADHD impulsivity are making decisions and doing things that tend to have the risk of getting them in trouble. They're doing things that they may not do if they had an opportunity to really sit down and stop and think about it. They may begin to engage in physical relationships with other students. They may engage in other kinds of sort of pleasure-seeking behaviors because of that impulsivity. Impulsivity not only affects relationships, but it also affects other decisions. So, for example, we see students with impulsivity making impulsive purchases. They will go to the store and they'll buy things that they don't really need. It looks good on the shelf, and so they'll buy it. And as soon as they get it home, they may be thinking, I don't even know why I bought this. And they have a closet full of things like that. It's impulsivity. It's just impulsivity with a slightly different appearance. As they age, adolescents with impulsivity tend to jump in and out of other major decisions. They make what we would consider major decisions on a whim and with relatively little thought. So when you think about from anything from diet to sexual activity, their internal impulsive drives tend to lead them towards immediate satisfaction. So again, as I mentioned earlier, while they may shift from relationship to relationship, you also may see them taking a job somewhere out of nowhere, and then just as quickly quit the job because, oh my gosh, they need me to be there at right after school, and don't they know that I need to hang out with my friend after school? They will be completely dedicated to the decision initially, but then they will abandon it just as quickly when another shiny nickel shows itself. As they begin to work, they again will take these jobs, and they will have problems with their bosses, typically have problems with their bosses, and may get fired or quit, again, as soon as it seems to interfere with something else that they want to do. They may miss work shifts because, my friend asked me to go out with them, and he hardly ever asked me to go out with him. Though you and I know that same friend asked him to go out with him just a couple of days ago, and we'll probably ask him to go out and do something in another couple of days. So these decisions are made impulsively, and again, it's usually with the idea of immediate pleasure seeking. What feels good to me right now? This impulsivity continues into adulthood, and it continues with much the same appearance. When students, for example, enter college, what we see is that they have very frequent changes in their majors. They may even change colleges frequently. They may start at a community college, then they'll get into another local four-year school, then they'll go to another college. And again, it's just the decisions that they make are impulsive and based upon what they're experiencing at the moment. I know a lot of students who change majors dozens of times because they'll take a class, usually a required class, and they'll say, oh my gosh, this anthropology class is fantastic. I'm going to major in anthropology. And so they go and do all the paperwork to change their major to anthropology. And then the next semester they take sort of the next level of anthropology classes, and they think, wow, this is not as exciting as the last one, but man, this sociology class is really exciting. I'm going to go major in sociology. So they go and change their major to sociology. Then the next semester, there'll be a biology major. Then the semester after that, they'll be majoring in something else. So that type of impulsivity is often associated with ADHD. And again, ADHD as it evolves over time. And as our decisions become more adult decisions, more decisions that have a greater impact on things. This, of course, is very different than the impulsivity that we see in childhood, where it's more immediate, small things like interrupting their parents when they're talking and those kinds of things. With the adolescent and young adult, the impulsivity sometimes has more significant impact on their lives. So, all right, so that wraps up that lesson. Hopefully you recognize now that, again, not only does the symptoms associated with ADHD continue into adolescence and then, of course, later into adulthood, it becomes a little bit more challenging to recognize them because they change from what we typically consider ADHD symptoms, and they begin to manifest in very different ways, and sometimes in ways that can have dramatic impacts on the person's life. So, again, as I've mentioned before, we will be talking a lot more about how we're going to handle those kinds of issues in Unit 4 of this course. So stay tuned for that, and hopefully that'll be helpful for you. So this wraps up not only this lesson, but this unit. So if you have any questions about anything that you've heard, either in this unit or this lesson on adolescence, or in this unit on the developmental course of ADHD, please write it in the notes section. We look forward to hearing from you and hope this helps. So we'll see you next in Unit 3, which covers medical treatment.